I'd like to welcome everybody to the July 16, 14, City of Rapid City Legal and Finance Committee. July 16th, 2014. I'm a little tired. City of Rapid City Legal and Finance Committee, and I see we are missing a couple of council members. If they could come on in. Yeah, I know they're here.
I'm in the caucus room right now.
Okay, well, first order of business is a roll call and determination of quorum, which I do believe we have. Here. And up next will be the adoption of the agenda. Does anybody have anything they wish to add to the agenda or remove? None appearing, I'd entertain a motion to adopt the agenda. And motion by Doyle, second by Drew. I have to think of your new name. Thank you. Drew, to adopt the agenda. All in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed? Motion carries. Now I'd like to welcome Alderman Laurenti and Alderman Weifenbach to the meeting. Up next is general public comment, a time for members of the public to discuss or express concerns to the council on any issue not on the agenda. Action will not be taken on any meeting at the meeting on any issue not on the agenda except a placement on the agenda by unanimous vote of the council members present. I currently have no speaker request forms for general public comment. Does anybody wish to speak on anything that's not currently on the agenda? No. That's on the agenda. Okay. Okay, and none appearing, I'm going to move on to general public comment, or public comment for consent items numbers 1 through 15. I do have a speaker request form for Mr. Don Frankenfeld for items numbers 4 and 17. You would approach the podium, sir, and speak on one item and after the other, I guess. You have 3 minutes apiece.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Item 4 is the retention of Doherty and Company as the fiscal agent to put together a financing plan for the Civic Center. I speak in favor of that resolution, and I know Pauline is here, and I'm guessing she'll say something probably when the item comes up. I think the role of Doherty is critical to the hope that we'll be able to sell $180 million in bonds to finance the Civic Center. I've been on the Civic Center Finance Committee that is chaired by Pauline, and there are others in the room who've been part of that committee. We've worked diligently to come up with a financing plan. We were a little surprised, I think others were too, by the absolute magnitude of the project as it ultimately came down at roughly $180 million. And we as a committee have struggled to figure out how we can support that with the cash flow available to the city and with the coverage requirements, bond coverage requirements that statute imposes upon us. It's a dilemma, and Woody Woodson has had some suggestions, but he hasn't yet been retained, and I think it would be a very wise thing to retain him and his company to make this happen. Shall I speak, Mr. Chair, on item 17 as well, or not?
Yeah, I can start. I'll start you over right now.
Okay.
You have 3 minutes on this item as well, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't think it'll take that long. I sent an email to all council members, not just the 5 who are here today, and I'm a little bit confused, frankly, about what you'll be deciding with respect to the Civic Center. I see that the agenda, as last I looked at it, had only the presentation that Donovan and others made at the last city council meeting. So I don't know whether there's an action item pending. If there is, I hope you will consider a proposal I have made to guarantee that this matter will come to a public vote. I think it would be unconscionable for it not to come to a public vote. And as you know, there's no automatic mechanism by which the city council can force that issue. But you can make your, I believe, make your enacting clause contingent upon a successful public vote. I think you ought to do that, and I hope you'll consider it. If now is the time, not me, but if today is the time that you would consider offering the appropriate amendment, I would be glad. And if it turns out you don't have any action item, I hope you'll save it for future reference. This seems to be within the rules that Rapid City must live under. We're not a home rule charter community, so we don't automatically have the right to submit something to the people for a vote. But the way the language that I've suggested holds in abeyance the final implementation until such time as there is an affirmative vote, it would still be up to others to circulate the petitions necessary to have that affirmative vote. But that, I believe, would be a far better alternative than what I've most recently heard from Jerry Wright and others, that let's just do it, the city council just do it, and if people want to refer it, they can. That's, to me, is kind of a dangerous step because it's not clear whether people will organize and submit the petitions. And when they finally vote on a referendum, it's a vote to reject what the city council has done. It's not the best way to go forward with the project, in my opinion. So I hope you'll consider some variation of the suggestion I have made, which does guarantee, I think guarantee, a public vote, which I think is a matter of good faith. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Frankenfeld. And the chair will recognize Mr. Brad Estes to speak on item number 17, 4 and 17 as well. Sir, if you'd please identify yourself.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Brad Estes. I'm a resident of Ward 5, and I also happen to be an alderman of Ward 5, and I'll be sitting with you on Monday working on whatever you decide to send to us. And on item 4, quickly, I agree with Mr. Frankenfeld. We have a decision to make. We have a larger decision to make, and a group of people have gone to an awful lot of work since 2011. Futures Committee, design groups and stuff and such, and they've come up with a project, and it's a very aggressive project for the city, but it's what the user groups have said we need, and I think it's been a very thoughtful process. But I think we need, the other leg to the stool, and I think we need to empower, on number 4, our finance officer to be able to give us the best information we have available to tell us whether or not we can afford this thing. Now, on item 17, I see item 17 a little differently. I think that we need to do several things. We have people out there that have taken a lot of interest in this project, and rightfully so. And some people that want to horribilize it will say, well, it's $180 million today. It's going to be $225 million by the time they get done. I think we have to say, you know what, $180 million, that's the cap. We're going to look at Doherty Dawkins to see if we can finance it, but we're going to set the cap. The other thing I think we need to do is, I don't think we want to get into designing this building from the dais, and in this construction management at risk process, it's still a fluid design. But I think what we need to do is let the design crew and the contractors know that whether or not the blue scheme, in theory, is amongst the 3 schemes anyway, is the one we want to move forward with. And so I think, to me, that's what 17 does. We tell the group, maybe we have a little sticker shock, but 180 is the deal. We're going to see if we can afford it. We have the basic design concept, and then we're going to see, and we approve all this contingent upon still being able to revisit it once we know if we can afford it. And at that time, we all have to decide. I know I haven't had a chance to reread the new email I guess I got from Mr. Frankenfeld, and I have respect for him, but how we want to vote on it is a decision we all have to come to at that point in time. But right now, I don't think we're at that point in time. We need more information. So I hope that you're able to send to the council with full support items number 4 and 17. And I don't think that by sending those to council with your support that you're denying anybody of their rights to be heard. It's just kind of setting the benchmarks and drawing a line in the sand. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Estes. Okay, I have no further speaker request forms for items number 1 through 15, except for our esteemed mayor, Mr. Sam Quaker, who would like to speak now. Sir, identify yourself for the record, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sam Quaker, Mayor. I am speaking to you today on the two Civic Center related items. First of all, I support the architect's plan subject to an acceptable financing package. I support a public vote. This is the single largest expenditure in the history of Rapid City. However, it is important to know that we do not have the ability, like Sioux Falls and other home rule cities do, because we are not a home rule city, we do not have the ability to put the item on the ballot, so it would have to be an initiated measure, like what Mayor McLaughlin and the City Council did in 1993 when they led the effort then to change the Vision Fund, or it would be a referendum. Joel has been working on some language, and I'm not sure what his opinion is on it yet, but he's been working on some language on the possibility of putting a requirement in the package that would ultimately be before you to require a public vote, but that would ultimately be up to the council. I would say that today's motion is a major step forward, and it's not the final step, because what we would be voting on, what you would be voting on today and Monday, would not be the item that would go to a public vote. That vote would likely be on the financing package, and what this does is it moves the process forward so that the cost can be, or the financing package can be determined. But it's very important that we proceed with a unified voice, and I would encourage the council to take strong action today on a motion to adopt or recommend approval of the concept that's been recommended by the Civic Center Board and the architect, contingent on an acceptable financing package being brought forward and approved, and that would be another vote. Thanks again.
Okay, and I have no more speaker request form. Well, I do actually have a speaker request form in the form of Jerry Wright.
Thank you. To follow in step, I agree with the mayor that we need to move forward, and I do believe it would be appropriate for us to make a motion or move forward with approving the blue concept and to approve the project contingent upon an acceptable financial package. I guess since Mr. Frankenfeld's mentioned my name, I do feel strongly that the council has an obligation to make a decision on this, and our decision is fully referable to the people, and I would answer the question of the public say. So I think that the council has, in my opinion, a responsible obligation to see this through and let the people decide if they wish after our action. I support the project as this motion was read by the mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wright. And any further discussion? Anybody else just wants to step up and have fun? Okay. Any more speaker requests? I'm going to now close public comment on items number 1 through 15 and move to the agenda. Anybody wish to remove anything from consent items 1 through 15? No speaker, no one appearing. I'll entertain a motion to adopt those 15 items. Approve, excuse me. Second. Motion by Laurenti, second by Weifenbach for adoption of, or excuse me, approval of items 1 through 15. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Now on to non-consent items numbers 16 through 18. I'm going to open public comment for items 16 through 18. I already let people speak on item number 17, but so I guess we'll move on. Anybody wish to speak on any items numbers 1 through 8 or 16 through 18? Excuse me. No more speaker requests. I'm going to close public comment on those items. I will. And I'll move on to item number 16, which is the Human Relations Commission semi-annual update. And we have an update from
Good afternoon.
Sir,
I'm Melbert Shield, Chairman of the Human Relations Commission. Just making our semi-annual report to you, and I believe you got my report, and so I guess maybe if there aren't any other questions and you read it, I'll let it go at that.
Okay, well, as soon as I read it, I guess I'll recognize Charity Doyle to ask you a question.
Thank you. Pronounce your new last name for me again. Shu?
No, no, that's the Lakota name for prairie chicken, which is like if there was an H there, Shio.
Shu, okay, okay. Thank you very much. That's not my question, though.
Oh.
My question is, I thought the report was very thorough, and I really enjoyed having a printed copy of it this time.
Yeah.
The items on there, can you address a little bit how the changes we've recently made? I know you haven't been able to exercise like the subpoena power or any of that.
Oh, yeah.
But the changes that have been made, are you finding, smooth transition into incorporating those with the way you are
Yeah.
processing things?
Yeah,
How is that going?
That's been a smooth transition because that is part of the ordinance, and that's what we go by. We haven't been able to actually put it into use right now, and all of those are also going to be in our handbook, so every commissioner from here on out will have a copy of that, and they can refer to that as to how the process goes and where it goes. So.
Well, I just have to say I really appreciate your flexibility, and you're used to doing things a certain way and learning how to adjust and go with it. But I think as council members, we all made decisions based on a lot of conjecture. And so I think, at least speaking for myself, I would really appreciate it as you give these quarterly reports, just an update on how those changes are, the pros and cons of them, so that we know that moving forward, so that we can potentially redress anything down the road.
Oh, sure.
Okay, thank you very much, Mel.
Thank you.
No more speaker request forms, or no more speaker lights. Anybody wish to speak any more on items or? Motion to acknowledge by Doyle, second by Laurenti. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, sir. Item number 17 is discussion and proposal for design and financing of expansion of Rushmore Plaza Civic Center. And Chair recognizes Charity Doyle.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Make a motion to recommend approval of the Rushmore Plaza Civic Center Expansion Project Blue Concept, recommended by the Civic Center Board of Directors in amount not to exceed $180 million, contingent on an acceptable financing package being brought forward and approved. And then if I may retain the floor after a second.
Motion by Doyle, second by Laurenti, and you still have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do have some questions. I wanted to address Mr. Frankenfeld's suggestion because it was quite intriguing, actually. So a question for Mr. Landy.
By all
if I
means.
may. I'm still getting caught up from vacation here, so if you guys have discussed this, just point me in the right direction. So I am rather intrigued by that notion of putting a secondary contingency, or maybe down the road on the financing package might be a more appropriate place to place this contingency that Mr. Frankenfeld brought forward. Can we do that legally? I mean,
I was first informed of this proposal late yesterday afternoon. I have not had time to do an extensive research. I did at the request of the mayor, and he alluded to it. I've been asked to potentially look at some language that could be added to either this or to the, more than likely, I think you're right, the financing that would then require before it went forward or was actually implemented that it would need to be initiated. My initial reaction is that it probably is legal. I mean, at the very least, if you say we're approving this on the condition that this occur, if that doesn't occur, it's hard to say, well, that wouldn't go into effect. Another just practical observation is who's going to challenge the legality of it. If you were going to put all the effort into challenging the legality of that provision, why not just go forward and have it initiated? I mean, that would be the easiest course of action. So I don't know that there's really a lot of threat of challenge. So I don't know that there's going to be a lot of case law out there as guidance on it. But I know, and I'm trying to find some things that we've done in the past to see if there's a precedent for it. We've put sunset clauses in, so I don't know that. And in fact, I think there may have been something with the sign code that was kind of a condition precedent put into one of the, is what I would call it. So my gut reaction is that it's probably legal, but since I was just informed of it yesterday afternoon, I will say I haven't had a lot of time to do extensive legal research on it.
Okay, so you would agree that it's a more appropriate place to have this discussion with the actual voting on the financial package once that comes forward?
I believe so. You know, I know there's some discussion about what are we actually approving today with this motion, but until the money's in place, you really haven't approved anything. I mean, we need to put the financing package together. And as I've expressed to some of you, the purpose of this motion at this point, before we go forward and put together a financing package, we feel it's important that, I mean, the council could choose to say, we don't agree with the recommendation that this committee that made their recommendation, the Civic Center Board, now the Civic Center Board has approved. You know, we need to know as staff, we've talked about it internally, whether or not you approve this concept and whether or not, whether we can put a financing package together that gets to this amount, if you're willing to spend this amount. And maybe, I understand that to some degree, whether or not you're willing or believe we can spend this amount is going to depend on the financing package, and that approval is still required. I mean, this doesn't bind you to move forward with this project. What it says is, we accept the concept that's been recommended, and we are setting this as the amount to look at for the finance officer so she knows when she works with Doherty and Company, this is how much we need to come up with and be able to finance. And I think it sends a message to the design team then and to the contractors that when you come up with that final number, the construction price, the guaranteed price that you're going to have to build it for, that is the number. It's not going to be 190 million. It's not going to be 200 million. This is going to be the maximum number when they haven't done an extensive amount of design work yet, and there's going to be ways to bring it in, but they need to kind of have that number in mind now whenever they move forward, and that's probably a discussion when the financing comes forward, is because it will take some time once a financing recommendation is made for us to put everything together and actually issue it, and you'll have some decisions probably to make about design work and where to go with that. But when we discussed it internally, these are the two things that we feel we need to know right now in order to move forward with the financing package and put something together for you to come back and consider. But ultimately, it all depends on the financing. If we come forward with a financing package, then you're going to have to look at it and decide, can the city afford this, and is this the best idea? But we didn't even want to get to that point if you don't buy into the concept. So that was the purpose for the motion today and the recommendations today.
Okay, thank you. One other thing to consider, not for discussion right now, but as this idea comes back up with the financing package, back to Mr. Frankenfeld's suggestion, is if there's a way we can word it to where a public vote were not to happen, it doesn't put a kibosh on the project. Because the language as it is right now, if that didn't happen, it would go away. And I think there's some way we can finesse that perhaps. But just to think about as you're doing some research on that, I'd appreciate it.
And we had that discussion. You know, the one concern I've expressed that I would have is, I know there have been instances in the past where items were initiated, but there were community groups and organizations that had manpower and the resources to go out. I would think if that's something the council's looking at, I would start looking at trying to find a group to pair with that would be willing to carry that to a vote, rather than just let it sit and languish for several months and nobody gets signatures or nobody's even out collecting signatures and you're just delaying the project. Because keep in mind that any delay in the project at this point, you're probably also increasing your construction expenses. So whether or not you want to try to craft this so you can get it initiated, that's really up to the council to decide if you think that's a good idea. But I would encourage you to look at the other side of it and say, if we're going to do this way, we need to start doing the work now to get somebody else. In the past, my understanding is the chamber carried that and did it, because it's not like the city staff is going to be able to go out and collect signatures. So unless you have somebody else that's willing to go out and collect signatures, I just worry that you're going to have this language that says we should initiate this, or it doesn't go into effect unless it's initiated, and then nobody's going to be out collecting signatures, and it's just going to sit there, and all you're doing is increasing the construction cost. But if that is something that appeals to you, then go out now and try to line up with some group or groups that's going to be going out as soon as you make approval of the ordinance, and be taking that and getting the signatures necessary to get it on the ballot.
Could we put a time limit restriction in that as well? Or at least that's another question to look at as we ponder this issue.
Sure.
Okay.
I think you could.
And then a question for the finance officer, if I may.
By all means.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Do we have any type of restrictions, Pauline, on council contingency for a movement like that? Or would there be a more appropriate funding source to help spearhead that issue?
Quite honestly, and Joel can correct me if I'm wrong, municipalities cannot use their monies in any kind of lobbying efforts.
Okay. Just wanted to make sure. Thank you. I yield.
Thank you. Chair will recognize Alderman Steve Laurenti.
Thank you, Chair. And I appreciate Alderwoman Doyle's comments there, because I want to thank Mr. Don Frankenfeld as well for his recommendation, and voice my support for that. I wholeheartedly support this project, and I have from the beginning, because I believe we need to do something with the Civic Center. It's in need, and our community needs it for the next 20, 30, 40 years. So I'll be supporting it, but I sure would like to see, and I will support a resolution or an amendment to the final finance package that makes a contingency on a public vote. And I would be more than willing to be one of those people to gather the necessary signatures to make sure that it gets put on the ballot. So I just wanted to voice that, and I'm hoping that my colleagues feel the same. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Laurenti. Chair recognizes Alderman Ron Weifenbach. Welcome to the club.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I've been diligently gathering information that's outside of the public venues that they've had, and it's sort of like swallowing water through a fire hose. And in reference to the financing, I think it was important, as we discussed, that we understand if this is going to move forward, how we can get it financed. I'm on board with that, and some of the caveats I would want to also bring about, and hopefully those answers will come back, are in reference to the bonding capabilities of the city. There's been some concerns about that. My understanding is that the city will be maxing out their bonding capacities with this bonding going forward. And the other question I have is in reference to the Vision 2012 funds being used for the project. There is a mechanism in place to vet Vision 2012 items. From my understanding, that we're moving forward with amending some of that stuff. I'm hoping that that information comes forward, because it's important that we follow a good process as this project goes forward. And I think that Mr. Estes had pointed out the fact that if we get a cap, that gives these people a place to start. I mean, it's been a virtual moving target. The ACOM study was based upon information that a lot of it gets outdated quickly. It was, there was a moving target on the price tag of the Civic Center. I think they did the study at $125 million. Going back to item 17 in reference to the blue concept, I've looked at it. It's grandiose. It's gorgeous. I think that part of the grandiose is an attraction that is meant to be to attract another level of client to the Civic Center. Some of the information I've been unable to get is ongoing operating and maintenance costs for the exponential amount of services that will be provided by the Civic Center in reference to concerts, venues, those types of things. So that's hopefully information that will come forward. The last meeting that we're at Monday night, I felt when I came here today that was my opportunity to ask some of these questions. So I'll still be looking for that information, but I think it's an important fact that we move forward to find out what those financing vehicles are, if there's a difference, if we have to shift things around for bonding capacities, how does that affect future bondings in the city? There's a lot of projects that are worthy in this city. There's a lot of projects that this money for this Civic Center will not allow the city to move forward on, and I think that's important that the people of Rapid City understand those. Then I'll go into the voting mechanism. I think you can spend $180 million of taxpayers' money. I think it's important that they have a voice in it. I think that we've talked about a few different mechanisms of which way to approach that. I think if you want to get somebody to buy into what you're doing, I think you need to involve them in what you're doing. And I know we've had public venues about the building of the Civic Center. I think that they've been somewhat probably not real well attended. I'm hoping that the people come out now, that they see that this thing's moving. You got a train moving down the track. I hope they make their voices heard. I hope they bring in their comments, and I hope people don't pillarize them for those comments. Because looking at this, I have a lot of questions still, and I think that our constituents will have a lot of questions. But moving forward gives them an opportunity, because there's some of them we can't answer unless we get those answers through finding out, is it even feasible? I mean, we're talking, I think, in reference to the information I've got, is about $11 million a year for 30 years just to finance the building. That has nothing to do with the maintenance of the building. It has nothing to do with any of the added costs that are involved. We're talking about an additional 500 parking lot spots and an additional, I think it's 9,000 seating capacity. So those are issues that are going to come up. The ACOM study talks about parking spots in a different venue than what the Blue Concept brings forward, and so people have to be cognizant of those items. So, I mean, I've went through this study 3 or 4 times. I've got a lot of questions, I think, but moving forward, I think is important. As we can move forward, we can talk about Mr. Frankenfeld's plan on seeing how and what is the best possible mechanism to get this to the public and get them involved in how they vote for it. I mean, back in the 70s, I was here, and people want to bring that up and continually bring that up. The people voted on those things. They knew what they were getting into. There was their money they're spending. This is a lot of money, $180 million. So I think it's important that we do this right. I think it's important that we look at all the facts, the information that's presented to us, and try to gather those facts and present them to the people that have those questions without actually pillarizing them, saying, are you for this or against it? I think it's vital to our community to do something at the Civic Center. I'm not exactly positive what it is. This blue plan looks grandiose. Anybody that's seen it would just be completely amazed by the architect that's involved in it, the structure that's involved, the capacity that it has. But the questions that I have is, how does that capacity happen? If you're a business person and you're building a project like this, you would have a pretty good idea of what your revenue and expenses were going to be. Where do those points come together where it makes sense to do the project? And that's where I'm at with the project. So I want to leave no question in anybody's mind that this is moving forward on my vote, simply because I agree that this is information that we need to get. So thank you, and I'll look forward to having a conversation Monday. And I'm hoping, Mr. Chair, that I can ask Joel one question.
By all means, Mr. Renandine.
Or ask him to do something, and is to make sure that these 2 items are not on the consent calendar on Monday night.
The easiest way to do that, if I may interject, is just to vote no.
I have no.
Or you can just
Or just
withdraw
pull
it.
it.
I mean, I don't think it's going to sneak through on consent.
Yeah, this is not going to go through.
So,
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, and then before I go to Darla Drew here, I want to go to finance, because perhaps she can answer a couple of questions that were raised in that last conversation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, I want to assure you guys that as the finance officer, I would never recommend that we maximize our bonding authority to the point where we could not do any more projects. That would not be very smart for a career, to have a career, quite honestly. As I presented last Monday night, the mechanism that we're looking at is an annual appropriation lease. That is one of the bonding or debt mechanisms that does not count against our constitutional debt limit. Attached to number 14 on the consent calendar are reports that I am required to present to you in July. One of those attachments is the computation of the legal debt margin, or our constitutional debt limit as of 12/31/13. And at that time, there's about $120 million left in bonding authority that could count against our debt limit. So there are other projects that can still get completed through other debt issues and that do count against the debt limit, but this would not be one of them. Now, I can't say that a portion of the financing package might not count against it. I mean, a portion might, just depending on what the best package is. I don't know that yet because the contract was just on today's agenda. So that's one of the things that we'll come back with, if there will be some aspect of it that'll count towards the debt limit, but the majority of it probably will not.
Thank you, ma'am. Appreciate that. Chair Rebecca has Darla Drew.
Okay. Oh, it's on. Well, as a newbie here, I have been out and about to many events and approached by people on the Civic Center expansion and rebuild. and I have encountered very little negativity on it. Most people are very positive about this happening. So I would say to the Civic Center board and employees that this is your window. This is your time to get out and sell this program. I mean, if you've got something that you've maybe filmed from some of your presentations, or just go ahead and make one separately and get that out on the public television channels, or call some more meetings, then you don't have to go through this all again. But you have a really great window of opportunity right now to get ahead of this and put a positive spin on it before it goes out to the public and the negativity starts. So that's all I had to say. I just want to encourage you to do that.
Thank you, Darla. And up next, we'll go back to Ron Weifenbach.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'll just make sure. Thank you, Pauline, for your explanation. Some of the question I have is in reference to, other bonding capacities if we use reserves and those types of things. So just if we make sure when we have those proposed that we have the answers to those questions, I guess, is where I'm going with it. So thanks.
Okay. Any further discussion on item number 17, excuse me. The motion is to, could you read it back to the record, please? No? Okay. Charity, could you clarify it for us, please?
Yes, I will. Okay, the motion was to recommend approval of the Rushmore Plaza Civic Center Expansion Project Blue Concept, recommended by the Civic Center Board of Directors, in an amount not to exceed $180 million, contingent upon acceptable financing package being brought forward and approved.
Okay, and the second was by Laurenti. Any further discussion? Before we proceed, media, I want you to realize we are not approving $180 million. I don't want that in the paper tomorrow. It's just a concept, okay? All right, all in favor say aye. Aye. Motion carries. Item number 18 is an introduction, first reading of ordinance 5997 to amend Rapid City's Municipal Code, Section 2.60.030, to change the month in which Planning Commission members are appointed. Motion by Weifenbach, second by Laurenti to approve. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. The motion adjourned by Doyle. Second by Drew. All in favor? We are now adjourned.